Hey, glad you are here, just in time for another round of questionable comfort and gentle insomnia. Tonight, we are poking around a place where the morning breeze carries. News you would rather not smell. Let us put it that way. If you happen to enjoy this odd sort of bedtime story, go ahead and tap like or subscribe. Honestly, it helps keep the lights on, metaphorically. Plus, it will amuse the algorithm. Tell me, what time is it where you are? And where are you listening from? Always fun to picture someone drifting off in Tokyo, while someone else is fighting sleep in Toronto. Dim the lights, get cozy, maybe grab a warm drink, unless you are one of those cold glass of water types. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. So you are finally awake. No gentle alarm clock, just the luxury of a sunbeam elbowing through a filthy wooden shutter, if you are lucky. If not, maybe you wake to the graceful sound of your neighbor hacking up what is generously called a cough, the mattress underneath you, if you can call a bag of straw and mystery lumps a mattress, has done its usual job of flattening your backside and spreading the rich aroma of damp wool. Your head pounds, your back aches, and your morning breath could clear a street. Which is saying something, since the street itself already smells like the inside of a lost boot. You glance around your room and find exactly what you expect. Straw, a few hopeful pieces of wood serving as furniture, and someone else's laundry, which looks as suspicious now as it did yesterday. You consider attacking the day with last night's drinking water, but when you see what is floating on the surface, you think, maybe bravery is overrated. You rub your eyes, which does not make the morning crisper. If anything, now your fingers smell faintly like your bedding. A gentle reminder that laundry day is whenever you finally give up and burn something. There is no such thing as scented fabric softener, but there are plenty of scents. Your first conscious act is assessing your odds, like everyone does these days. Is today going to be the day? You run your tongue along your gums, just to make sure they have not turned black overnight. So far, so good. The fresh air, if you care to open the window, hits you with a blend of, well, let us call it medieval cologne. You have got last night's chamber pots making their grand appearance in the street, a whiff of roasting something, and a background note of panic. The only thing roasted for breakfast, by the way, could be rat, if you are lucky, and the neighbor's cat missed one, so you savor your options. Stale bread, older cheese, and a cup of something that is not coffee, because coffee does not exist. There is warm water if you are feeling optimistic, or maybe a weak beer if you want to take the edge off. Hygiene in the modern sense is just a rumor. At least you have a basin. The water is cold, so it does wake you up, right after freezing your hands and making you question every life choice in any life, past or present. Your neighbors shuffle past your door, their voices muffled, a running commentary on who has fallen sick this week, who is still coughing, and who managed to find an onion at the market. Everyone is pretending to be very interested in the weather, but it has that haunted, hopeful edge, as if talking about rain might scare away the plague gods. You give a nod when you spot someone, just enough to look friendly, but not reckless. No one wants a hug. The phrase "good morning" feels a bit ambitious. Morning will do. There is a comfort in routine, even this one. Maybe you rinse your face. Maybe you mutter something to whatever higher power you hope is listening. Maybe you brace yourself for a day of avoiding rats, rumors, and people who sneeze too loudly. At this point, the phrase "rise and shine" is wishful thinking. You would settle for rise and do not die. If this all seems bleak, Just remember, the concept of cleaning products that actually smell fresh is the stuff of wild imagination. The closest thing to a morning pick-me-up is a bucket of water aimed at your own face, or the knowledge that, statistically, you are probably going to make it to lunch. No coffee, no toothpaste, no miracle wipes, and yet, somehow, the day starts anyway. A miracle, really, in its own grim sort of way. You hear it before you see anything, an odd, wet cough slipping through the walls, followed by the kind of silence that never means anything good. Someone in your house, or maybe next door, has started their day with that unmistakable hack. Instantly, the whole block's energy shifts. People talk with even more forced cheer, and suddenly, the usual parade of complaints sounds oddly hopeful, because complaining means you are still here. Whispers leak through the shutters. Old Marjorie has a fever. Tom from up the street is sweating buckets and can barely stand. Someone claims he found a weird bump near his armpit. The dreaded word is not said out loud, but everyone is thinking it. Plague. Now, today you would check a rash on your arm and turn it into a Google marathon. 20 tabs open, frantic scrolling. Convinced it is always the worst-case scenario. Back then, the only search engine was the neighbor who had not washed in a month and swears on his mother's grave he saw this all before. His medical opinion: rub it with garlic, avoid lettuce, and never sleep with your feet pointing east. Thanks, Dave. Very helpful. Let us break down the plague symptoms, since you cannot go a day without auditing yourself for them. First, maybe you get a fever, but that is not much news when cold, hunger, and low-level dread are just part of the playlist. Then come the chills. Nobody clocks a fever so well as someone who sleeps half the night shivering anyway. Eventually, the dark spots arrive. Not just your usual bruises. We are talking about bruises that look like you have lost a private fight with a bag of bad fruit. Swollen lumps, the famous buboes, pop up in your neck, groin, or armpits. Hot, swollen, tender. Imagine the worst mosquito bite, then triple it. Then invite all your friends to gasp at your misfortune. The real delight, though, is the smell. Forget floral undertones or a hint of mint. If a house starts smelling particularly sweet, everyone suddenly remembers a vital fact. The plague tends to marinate its victims in a scent somewhere between decomposing apple and unwashed sheep. You want to convince yourself it is someone's dinner cooking. You know better. There is always the hope it is just someone's foot rot, but you know better. News travels fast, even when walking is slow. By breakfast, the accusations have started. Was it the baker who brought his bread in from the next village? That herbalist who has not looked right all week? Suspicion floats through the air with every cough and sneeze. You hear wild theories. Rub a pigeon on your sores. Hang rosemary in every window. Never look a goat in the eye. The only confirmed treatment is to keep distance and whisper, while nervously clutching whatever charm or stale crust you think might help. No one knows what actually works, so everyone does all of it, twice for good measure. The anxiety is almost funny if you squint. Modern you might panic. Google every mole and ache. Here, you just hope your friend the amateur barber remembers which herbs are for healing and which ones are for seasoning. And forget masks. Everyone covers their nose, but only because the smell is making things worse, not better. So, are you doomed? That is the question every morning as you mentally check each symptom and try not to breathe too deeply. But even in all this, people still joke, still swap stories, still argue over the best useless remedies. There is a certain humanity in trying to outsmart something nobody understands. Still, it would be easier if you could just ask Search, "Do I have the plague, or is it just Tuesday?" No luck there. You are on your own, and every sniffle is its own little nightmare. Welcome to the world's least comforting version of WebMD, personal paranoia, with a side of neighborly dread. You learn quickly that sharing is not so much a choice as an ongoing negotiation, especially when it comes to rats and fleas. Waking up, you give your ankles a little scratch, already primed from half a dozen flea bites picked up in the night. There is a routine, almost comforting, in the daily inspection. Socks off, hope for the best, accept the worst. You pat yourself down for tiny dark specks before pulling on whatever counts as clean clothes, which is more of a feeling than a fact. If you hear scurrying, you do not bother looking for a lost pet. It is just another rat on its parade route. The house creaks not just from old beams, but from the spectacular bounce of rodents enjoying your leftovers, possibly your shoes, if you are unlucky. The rats are athletic. One minute you see a little gray shadow darting under the table, the next your bread has a daring bite missing. They do not bother hiding much. Why would they? The town is essentially a rodent-friendly buffet with complimentary lodging, and you are just another landlord with a soft mattress and questionable boundaries. Of course, things get lively if someone drops a scrap. The speed with which half a dozen rats materialize is almost magical. They bicker like tiny, furry drunkards, diving straight into the fight, tails tangled, squeaks resounding. It is honestly more entertaining than the last festival, not that you are invited. Meanwhile, the fleas keep up their end of the deal, hitching rides on your clothes, your pets, your neighbors, never missing a shift. Townsfolk have theories. Some say rats are lucky, at least when they stay outside. Others eye them with open suspicion. But no one is putting together the grand puzzle. The fact that last winter's population boom coincided with a spike in funerals is just another bit of trivia for the market gossips. As for fleas, they are, at best, proof you are still alive. If you have not felt the tiny bite of a flea today, you are either blessed or simply numb. You ask around. Everyone has a trick. Cats are currency, especially a tough old tomcat who earns his place by thinning out the competition. A decent mouser is worth more than your best jacket. Superstitions stack up alongside practical efforts. Herbs crammed in corners, boots left upside down, bowls of water under the bed to trap bad spirits, and maybe a rat or two. No one really knows what works. Desperation breeds creativity. Sometimes, if someone gets especially fed up, they might try smoke or even a cautious burst of fire. To the delight of rats and the panic of neighbors who prefer their homes not to catch the trend, you sigh thinking of modern pest control. Clever little traps, sprays in neat bottles, promises of a rat-free life. Your own rat problem these days is a far cry from the medieval circus you are living in now. In your current world, seeing a mouse in the kitchen means a phone call and maybe an embarrassed note to the landlord. Here, the rat is almost a roommate, a local institution, trailing a cape of fleas and a reputation for audacity. You almost respect it. And the thing is, no one in town quite makes the connection between the waves of sickness and the tiny biters making you miserable. Why would they? There is always something else to blame. A bad wind, a curse, last week's spoiled cheese. You keep scratching, You keep sweeping crumbs from the floor, and you keep dodging the little bodies scampering over your feet at dawn. But at least, in your modern apartment, a rat problem rarely comes with a free epidemic. Small mercies. Here, the only reassuring thought is that you have survived another morning of bouncing, biting company. And that is about as close as you get to pest control success. If you wake up feeling unlucky, the logical next step is to consult the local experts, the medieval healers with enough confidence to carry a bag of questionable remedies from door to door. Think of it as your neighborhood pharmacy, only without the license, or well, much hope. First up in the morning's lineup is the leech. Not a metaphor. A real, slimy little creature applied without apology to your tender, plague-fearing flesh. The thinking, bad blood out, good health in. You lie there, trying not to flinch as the healer assures you these are the finest leeches in town, hand-picked, likely from the same pond where you think twice before fetching water. The sensation, wet, squirmy, mildly mortifying. But hey, you look down, see a trickle of blood, and think, maybe this is working. Discomfort is part of the healing process. Right, herbal poultice next, the sort of thing that looks almost believable in a recipe, but never in a cure. The healer takes a damp mass of mashed marjoram, thyme, and something suspiciously like basement mold, and slathers it across your buboes. You have to believe the process, because you certainly cannot believe the smell. Everyone maintains a straight face, but the room pulses with silent hope and anxiety. The poultice clings to your skin, cooling briefly before it warms into an itch as persistent as your doubts. If you are lucky, it drips onto your bedding, so you have a souvenir for later. Ah, and we cannot forget the star of the show, onion. Compressed, boiled, or sometimes simply halved and plopped directly on a lymph node, as if the plague will surrender to the sheer force of vegetable aroma. The debate rages, red onions or white. Some swear by garlic for added punch. Someone remarks that the whole street smells like lunch gone wrong. And then comes the roasted pigeon method, a favorite among the brave and bird-free. If you are fortunate enough to catch a pigeon, you roast it, then apply the hot carcass directly to the boils. The theory goes, draw out the poison and maybe tempt fate with a snack after. Once everything cools, you are left with half-cooked hope and a sense that at least you tried. Every option feels about as scientific as putting a wet sock on your head and reciting a prayer backwards. But absolutely no one has a better idea. You cycle through these treatments, never really expecting a miracle, but craving the comfort of doing something, anything, to keep the odds in your favor. The next morning, if you are still alive, you thank the healer with what little coin or bread you can spare, and promise to rub an extra onion on next time, just in case. No one dares skip a step in the ritual. In comparison, a bottle of Tylenol or a quick chat with the pharmacist seems like a luxury fit for royalty. Nobody here is arguing in online forums about which home remedy is best. They are too busy volunteering as test subjects in every new experiment. The emotional discomfort is almost as tangible as the physical. Letting someone you barely trust press a steaming poultice onto your armpit while your family pretends not to gag, or waiting while leeches get full, is a humbling exercise. No one enjoys it, but desperation keeps things moving. Today's cure might be tomorrow's old wives' tale, but you give it your all. You can only laugh at how picky modern whining sounds from here. Imagine rolling your eyes at menthol flavor or side effects. that do not include open wounds, or scrolling through reviews to see which anti-itch cream has the highest stars. Here, every option is 5-star, mostly because there is nothing left to lose. It is not hope, exactly. That keeps you licking onions and chasing pigeons around the block. It is simple human stubbornness, the urge to try, even when the odds are plain. You do it all, partly for comfort, mostly for survival, occasionally for the peace of mind that comes from proactive flailing. In the end, you carry the faint scent of onion soup and roasted bird wherever you go. And miracle or not, you are ready for whatever strange new trick tomorrow's healer brings. You step outside, still trailing a faint scent of onion and regret, and before you have even shut the door, a neighbor is waving wildly, eager to share the latest life-saving secret. The town square is buzzing. Think less community support group, more fevered suggestion box where no submission is too outlandish. Someone thrusts a handful of garlic bulbs at you, insisting you wear one around your neck all day. It is supposed to burn the plague out of the air, or at least keep people far enough away so you only share germs with yourself. You tie one on, because who has the energy to argue? And because, honestly, you are curious to see if your new perfume attracts rats, or if even they are put off by ode to panic. The advice does not stop at garlic. Another helpful soul swears that chanting a specific prayer backwards by moonlight not only wards off plague, but might help with toothaches, restless spirits, and possibly your love life. Someone else is pushing a talisman carved from potato, supposedly passed down from a cousin who once survived 3 fevers and lived to be 35. Try everything. Life expectancy is not long enough to cherry pick. Meanwhile, your best friend, meaning the person who has not sneezed in your general direction yet, sidles up with a little bag of dried herbs. Just boil these, inhale, and trust in the process. Side effects may include weird dreams and persistent side-eyes from your spouse. You are advised to rub chicken fat on your door, paint a cross above your bed, and avoid looking in mirrors for at least 3 mornings. The list never ends. Each bit of wisdom is delivered with full confidence, and sometimes the promise that someone's niece's neighbor's uncle's baker's ex-wife once tried it and survived. Who needs proof? Every morning, the energy is just slightly giddy, equal parts fear and hope, tied together with string from the last rosemary bundle. The less anyone seems to understand, the more creative they get. No official information, no reliable experts, just a community chat swerving wildly between superstition and culinary experimentation. It is weirdly familiar if you squint. Imagine your favorite internet group if nobody had spell check, and the only studies cited were done by local livestock. These are the days before comment sections, but not before chain rumors. News spreads fast, a miracle cure, a new symptom, a panic-buying run on leaks, and before you know it, the entire town is coordinated in collective chaos. One moment, it is garlic necklaces. The next, a rumor that burning your old shoes at midnight makes you plague-proof. You laugh, then hesitate, then start mentally sorting through your footwear just in case. If wisdom is crowdsourced, then you, my friend, are getting all the beta versions. Forget critical thinking. Survival means picking your favorite flavor of madness and committing hard. You cannot help but tally the advice. Should you bother trying to sleep upside down? Or is burying a coin under the front step enough? Is the cross made of ash more effective than one carved from stale bread? Better safe than sorry, or maybe just sorry with style? With every new piece of information comes a dose of anxiety, the creeping suspicion that you are always one garlic bulb behind the curve. Still, as the day grows later, you catch yourself doing the rituals, reciting the prayer, retying your necklace, swapping out yesterday's moldy charm for today's. You sigh, thinking you would never survive the modern world's advice avalanche, let alone a medieval one fueled by rumor and desperation. For now, you lean into the absurd, because everyone else is. And because, deep down, hope is sometimes just another word for panic put to work. Some mornings you get lucky, if lucky is the right word, and hear a sharp rap at your door. The whole house tenses. You open it just far enough to spot a shape that might haunt your nightmares, if nightmares bothered wearing a hat. Your official plague doctor has arrived, and honestly, you would not blame yourself for considering escape out the back window. He steps inside, and the room shrinks. The outfit is a spectacle. Layers of stiff, dark cloth, boots high and shiny, gloves that could handle snakes. The real showpiece is the mask, carved into a long bird's beak and stuffed with whatever passes for an air freshener, roses, mint, spicy herbs, possibly just dry bread. It is an improvement, maybe, on the local perfume of fear and boiled onion, but it does not exactly help with bedside manner. He does not say much to start. Just a slow scan of the room, his gaze hidden somewhere behind glass circles. You wonder how anyone can see out of those things, much less diagnose anything. Your own professional health care is now happening through layers of linen, leather, and superstitious optimism. A bit like a modern appointment conducted entirely by text, only slower and somehow more awkward. The sensory awkwardness hits hard. The mask rebreathes its mix of bitter and sharp. Steam gathers around the beak's edge, and the creak of leather fills whatever silence is left. You can smell your hope evaporating. He makes a show of poking your lymph nodes with a stick, lifts the nearest candle to your face, and sniffs politely from about 3 feet away before stepping back with an unreadable nod. Finally, the professional wisdom comes. You brace yourself for a breakthrough. Instead, it is short and sweet. Drink broth, do not get cold, avoid bad air, eat something with onions. You nod as if your life depends on it, which, technically, is what everyone's been doing all week anyway. There is a vague promise of return, but everyone knows he will be reacting to whichever household offers the best token of appreciation. Call it an early version of health insurance. You are covered if your soup supply is impressive enough. Watching the plague doctor work is like seeing someone rehearse for a role they have never read. Every gesture, every mumbled instruction gives you 2 things: the faint relief that someone cares, and the sharper realization that no one really knows what is happening, but at least he is trying. That counts for something in a town where expertise is measured by who managed to stay upright the longest. As quickly as he appeared, the doctor is gone, off to the next house, the next hopeless consultation, the next round of perfumed guesswork. You are left in a haze that is part herbal aroma, part resignation, with a pinch of hope layered over confusion. You sit there, oddly reassured. Not by the advice, and certainly not by the bird mask, but by the sense that, even surrounded by chaos, people are still showing up, still putting on their armor, still giving it a shot. There are worse ways to face the day. even if your urgent care provider just checked your pulse with a stick while breathing through a bird's nose. If the rumors are bad enough, or the wrong neighbor sneezes at the wrong moment, you might find yourself under quarantine. This is just a nicer way of saying, congratulations. You will be spending the next stretch of days trapped inside a house that already feels too small during harvest season. The routine is simple. Nobody in, nobody out, and the only deliveries are suspicion and airborne excuses. Welcome to enforced family time, long before anyone invented board games or figured out that windows could have actual glass. You and your household quickly reach the stage where conversation crawls. By day 3, you have memorized everyone's 5 best stories, their 2 worst habits, and exactly where the floor creaks during midnight pacing. As for privacy, the closest you will get is facing the wall and pretending those are not your relatives chewing that loudly. For supplies, you are running on a diet of stale bread, onions, and the eternal hope that this will all blow over before you run out of either. You ration the last bit of dried fruit the way some people ration chocolate, only with less joy. Your water tastes remarkably like wood, and your stomach develops a mysterious sense of regret for things you have not even eaten yet. Every morning, you cycle through little rituals of boredom and desperation. Someone tries to air out the bedding. It just ends up smelling like outside, which at this point is not much better than inside. You invent chores, not because the house needs it, but because you cannot bear one more hour of sitting quietly. You listen for the distant clanging of church bells, sometimes a sign that things are improving, sometimes a reminder that the plague is still taking attendance. Everyone pretends to stay hopeful by discussing what they will do once quarantine ends. The plans get more elaborate the longer you wait. One day it is a walk to the market. The next it is a feast for the whole street, even if the menu is just anything not involving onions. You exchange ideas for new bread recipes, even though your available ingredients make the exercise more theoretical than practical. There are moments when you hear laughter, mostly at someone else's expense. Like when your uncle invents a new way to repair the shutter and ends up locking out what little daylight is left, or when your younger cousin tries to spice up the evening by burning rosemary, hoping to make the air smell less like 4 anxious humans and more like something you would not mind inhaling. It just becomes smoky panic with a herbal twist. If you are lucky, you might have a dog or a particularly sarcastic cat for distraction. Otherwise, you are stuck with your family's attempts at medieval small talk and the ongoing debate over who snores loudest. It is a bonding experience, mostly in the way a rope binds things. It holds you together, but it is not always pleasant. Modern quarantines at least offer the hope of binge-watching, delivery apps, maybe discovering a hobby. Here, you just develop a deep longing for bread that is not as hard as floor tile, for a window that opens to more than a suspicious-looking street, maybe, just maybe, for one stolen whiff of something that does not smell like damp despair. Scented candles are centuries away, and the best you can do is wave a sprig of rosemary and pretend it is working. In the end, the days blur together. You lose track of the outside world, measuring time by the shape of the candle stub and the fresh batch of rumors hollered from window to window. Resilience starts with little things, a slightly funnier joke, an edible crust of bread, one quiet evening when nobody coughs. For now, this is what passing time looks like, a dance between hope, boredom, and the world's most relentless parade of household odors. Not everyone vanishes from the town roll call. A surprising number stumble through, rumpled, slightly more seasoned, and just as clueless about how they managed it. The stories always sound braver or smarter in hindsight, but the reality is far less glamorous. You could be one of the lucky ones. Maybe you were born with a set of stubborn genes, something deep in your body's private code that politely declines to let the plague settle in. Medieval science will chalk it up to hearty humor or a clean conscience, but it is just your cells quietly doing a competent job behind your back. Then there is dumb luck. You left town for your cousin's funeral just before the sickness swept your street. Or maybe the local rats took an unexplainable dislike to your taste and infested your neighbor's house instead. The world turns, and you win the lottery without buying a single ticket. Some survivors swear by boiled herbs, or prayer, or not bathing in cold water during specific phases of the moon. Others simply had a knack for avoiding crowds, often by being slightly unpopular. Funny how social distancing sometimes happens when you are just a little bit annoying. There is always that one person who only survives because they slept through all the danger or forgot to show up at the wrong place at the right time. Modern life is actually not so different. People still look for magic bullets, the right probiotics, the immunity smoothie that cancels out disaster, the promise that a little ginger can ward off all misfortune. But as much as we talk about good habits and miracle routines, so much comes down to being in the right spot, usually by accident, rarely by design. So if you wake up one morning and realize you are still here, no fever, no bruises, no mysterious ache under your arm, it is tempting to write your own survival guide. Resist the urge. There is no secret list. Most survivors look back and realize they got by with a weird recipe of small advantages, bigger distractions, and relentless randomness. You could try to make sense of it, or you could just pour a cup of something, not coffee, obviously, and nod quietly to fate. The fine line between fate and farce gets blurrier as time goes on. Ask around, and everyone seems to know someone who survived by accident, or because they happened to be out picking leeks that day. It is never fair, and it is never neat. Your odds are sealed by genetics, geography, a touch of rat prejudice, and a lot of noise. The lesson, if there is one, is to go easy on yourself and everyone else when it comes to survival stories. Modesty is your best bet. You can laugh privately at the idea that you bested a plague with nothing but a garlic necklace and a lucky draft under your door. Luck does most of the heavy lifting in pandemics and everything else, and as recent times remind everyone, it does not hurt to just be in the right place, at the right time, doing absolutely nothing remarkable. So here you are, ready to wind down in the safe embrace of clean sheets and mildly overpriced pillows. No fleas to check for, no garlic necklaces, and this is important, no neighbor urging you to rub onions on your lymph nodes before you close your eyes. If anything, it takes effort to remember how much comfort fits into a single evening now. Running water on demand, the gentle hum of Wi-Fi, and the blessed silence of a world where cures come in labeled bottles and advice is mostly filtered through logic. Your worst morning might start with a forgotten coffee or a traffic jam, not a ransacked bread bin and the triumphant squeak of a rat. You can message a doctor, get real medicine, or just sit in the bath until your skin prunes for fun. not because someone said it would draw out evil vapors. There is an odd kind of peace in this modern immortality, a life where luck still matters, but antibiotics do the heavy lifting. Even the most boring day is a quiet victory. You get to be annoyed about little things, soothed by streaming services, and spoiled by the endless selection of scented candles should your bedroom ever drift into medieval territory. Rest easy. The only plague nearby is an overgrown to-do list, and your morning breath is, thankfully, nobody's business but your own. The first light of dawn falls through the woven shutters of the weaver's hut, slender bars of amber moving across the pressed red earth and wood. Acua is already awake, her bare feet tucked beneath her, head bent to the rhythmic click, a metronome against the hush, of her grandmother's loom. There is dew outside, and hints of sweet smoke from a distant fire. Inside, time folds inwards. The warp threads are stretched taut across timber beams, endless as a horizon, thick and humming with memory. Acua traces their length, strong, sun-bleached cotton, her dark fingers ghosting over each one as her grandmother shows her, with a patience weathered by seasons, the pattern to which she must remain faithful. Each color, the old woman intones, voice low as the river in Harmattan, must have its reason. Each line must remember. Acua listens, wordless, to the music between pattern and chant. She is still a girl in the eyes of the village, with the elastic limbs of youth and the swiftness to run between groves for dye berries. But today, she knows herself to be a vessel. She threads golden silk, drawn from cocoons loosened by her own breath, deep under plant and leaves, beside the cerulean hue her grandmother grinds from clay. There is meaning in each intersection, gold for a king's grace, blue for storm and rebirth. This morning is not entirely like the others. Beyond the open threshold come unaccustomed voices, strange, clipped, edged with the ring of barter. The first of the white-skinned traders, emerged from the slow-plodding river boats, have arrived with gloved hands and a taste for color. Acua feels their gaze, hidden behind the uneasy laughter of men, whose skins the sun does not favor, slipping over the fabric stretched between her grandmother's fingers. The cloth, bright as bird wings, flutters in caught light, but inside the rhythm holds. The shuttle flies, the beater falls, threads embrace and knot themselves into language. There is a privacy to creation here, an intimacy between generations. Acua's grandmother weaves as she has for decades, as her mother before her, two women's breaths entangled in the warp's steady pulse. Stories within stories, told in silence, sewn into cloth by the flicker of wrist and the turning of eyes. Each day's weaving is a prayer, a memory, a claim on the land through which they have always moved. To the traders gathering round, the cloth is merely commodity, a curiosity to drape and display, a sheen to sell in distant streets where tongues spill currencies Acua will never taste. But Acua feels the old anger stirring in the hush between the loom's clacks, the knowledge that this Kente is something made not only to cover or to please, but to speak. Honor, ancestry, refusal. Her grandmother's hands, spotted and sinewy, fold over hers when she hesitates at a new pattern. They may buy what we make, the old woman says, quiet as thunder in the belly of clouds. But the story stays here. Do you hear it? Outside, children play beneath the leaning mango trees, their laughter fence posts between worlds. Women cluster at the well, braiding each other's hair, speaking names for each hue, Aniankapanati for God's gift, Adwanasa for wisdom spent, Sikafuturo for wealth on the path, each design a message, each variation a vow, the cloth not simply worn, but lived, echoing the shape of one's longing and belonging. Acua squints across the field where the British traders, restless as crows, barter for bundles of cloth. Their eyes scan patterns, counting value, weighing the gold threads glint. She senses in their gaze the first shadow of a future that will tug at what she knows. A promise of coins, but also the unmooring of purpose, the risk that a legacy may shift from creation to transaction. She presses her lips together and dabs dye onto a fresh cutting of cotton, letting the wind, rich with hibiscus and promise, carry her grandmother's story a little further down the loom. As the sun climbs, the hut's air grows fragrant with old sweat and new fiber. The warp unspools in gold and indigo, in green and flame, and Acua learns, more by the hush than the telling, that every cloth is a map, every pattern a path through time. The loom's song bends over her shoulders, urging her onwards. She weaves beneath the listening sky, her hands guided by the wisdom of those who loved the land before it was ever measured, weighed, or traded, before the world outside began to hunger for what rested, quietly trembling, in the warp and weft of their heritage. The months pass, and time, with its slow, unyielding hands, reshapes Acua's world in shades she cannot name. The village's edges bend beneath the approach of new faces, traders, missionaries, men in starched uniforms who ride to the palace with gifts and foreign words, who eye the woven bundles with a collector's hunger. Under the gaze of royal guards, the king himself now walks amidst the looms in the cool of the morning, his presence shadowed by the scent of gunpowder and sandalwood. Acua feels history thickening in the air, a curtain she can neither part nor step beyond. The loom, once carefree in its meditative song, grows still in the afternoons. Instead of the clatter and gentle murmur, a hush lays over the courtyard. Her grandmother sits with her feet drawn up, hands cupped as if cradling the memory of threads, eyes wandering to the busy road beyond the oval huts. The kingdom's women begin to gather in smaller clusters, their talk quieter than before, their laughter stitched with worry. It is not only the threat of trade or the glitter of gold that unsettles them, but the wordlessness that creeps in, the fear that certain tales might fray if told too recklessly. Acua studies the faces of the elders as they pass, their gaze ever drifting to her hands. Their silence holds counsel and warning both. The measure of one's worth is now entangled in what must remain unspoken. At home, the store of dyes is covered, the best patterns folded and tucked away in reed baskets, out of reach of passing strangers. Her grandmother's fingers tremble as she sketches new design paths in the ochre dust, lines spiraling into memory, unraveling the code of ancestors. "We must guard what is ours," she whispers, her voice a shifting leaf. "It is not always the loss you see that empties you. Some losses happen quietly, one missed story at a time." The British traders, quick-eyed and patient, notice the shift. They press coins into waiting palms and bring samples of European cloth, fine but lifeless, offered as tokens of reciprocity. Acua watches as elders examine the imported fabric, fingering its stiffness, frowning at its indifference to story. The children gather wide-eyed, fascinated by anything new. But the grown women hide their sorrow beneath smiles, as if smiling could mend what has already begun to unravel. One evening, beneath a sky awash in the first blush of harmattan, Acua finds her grandmother seated alone, lips moving with silent inventory. The names of the patterns, the phases of the moon at each weaving, the secrets hidden in the crow's foot or the winding snake. Acua sits beside her, pressing her cheek to the old woman's shoulder. It is here, in this slanting hush, that grandmother speaks, not in stories but in softness. I remember when Kente was sung, not sold, when each strand was a blessing. Now they number us, tally up our cloths, wanting to take what they cannot carry home. You must remember, weaving is not only hands, it is heart, what you hold and what you let slip. Acua breathes in the weight of those words. That night she dreams of the fields beyond the village, rows of cassava beneath a winking moon, and looms abandoned in the grass, mute witness to a vanishing chorus. The next day, her grandmother refuses to weave. The old woman carries her stool to the threshold, sets it in the filtered shade, and simply sits, watching, listening. The loom stands dusty in the corner, yearning for hands. Days lengthen, threads left unwarped curl and tangle, gathering the scent of rain and neglect. Only Acua, hunger and hope wrestling in her breast, returns to straighten the fibers when no one sees. The cloth she starts is hesitant, heavy, with the silence of deferred song. But from this pause, a new resolve is born. As twilight folds across the village, Acua takes up the spindle alone, hands trembling but determined. She works slowly, guiding weft through warp, her motions a careful tracing of what endures. For each inch of fabric, she whispers a star's name, a remembered proverb, the safe fragments of her grandmother's teaching. The silence sharpens her senses. Every thread is now an act of faith, each color a decision to remain. Outside, the traders gather at fires, telling their own stories in guttural voices, spinning ambitions Acua can scarcely imagine. Further away, the palace drums throb a warning through the trees, reminding all who listen that boundaries, between what may be shown and what must be sheltered, are being tested anew. Between the market's shouts and the stillness of the weaver's hut, Acua weaves not just cloth, but the fragile shape of possibility. When the cloth is finally done, its pattern breaks with tradition. Here a line is doubled, there a color blends where it ought not. Acua holds it up in the slow gold of early morning, searching the weave for her own reflection. Unsure, unorthodox, quietly resistant, she leaves the cloth folded, reverently, at the foot of the loom, a waiting question for her grandmother to find. In the quiet, the silent loom stands sentry, a boundary between tradition and the wide, uncertain world pressing close, between what must be protected and what must, however tentatively, grow. Dawn, bruised with the rose and clay of waiting rain, opens upon a village transformed by unease. The Ashanti kingdom's edges are pressed inward, streets edged with soldiers in crimson coats and traders in their wake, boots marking the dust with foreign intent. Yet in the household of weavers, the hush is not submission, but the slow, sinewed quiet that precedes a storm. The loom, long silenced, calls out to Acua. Its silence molds the room, a shape as palpable as breath held behind closed lips. When her grandmother discovers the folded cloth, strange, subtle in its rebellion, her eyes linger, no surprise in their depths. She sits, her back straight against the weight of years, and says nothing. Instead, she lays her palm over Acua's creation, fingertips seeking the code of hope and fear woven within. Their eyes meet, and what passes between them cannot be named. Not approval, not reproach, but the steeled beginning of understanding. Outside, life is rearranged into lines and checkpoints. The king's court fills with whispers of treaties and taxes, of cloth taken for royal tribute and European trade. Some men leave farms for the lure of coins, others fall silent, their opinions measured. Acua moves through daily errands with new caution, ears tuned to the shifting cadence of the crowd. She waits for her grandmother's verdict, but more urgently, she feels history pushing at her back, demanding her to act, to choose. The market square swells with the echo of foreign tongues. Here, amidst the baskets of millet, the traders offer more: beads, buttons, pages of printed prayer. They purchase Kente by the measure, haggling for patterns whose language they cannot decipher. What their gold cannot buy is always just out of reach, a motif snatched from the old myths, a color drawn from the edge of a well-kept secret. The artisans produce what is demanded, but each day, Acua watches as the threads of identity fray beneath commerce's sharp touch. Beside her grandmother's fire, Acua listens to the older women telling quieter stories. How cloth can be a shield, how a border woven into the pattern may whisper warnings, how long ago a queen wore a shroud of such cunning that those who would seize it saw only what she wished them to see. These are tales of survival, not surrender, defiance stitched in every selvage. Already, Acua imagines how she might slip certain symbols into her work, undetected, how she might tell, for those who notice, that all is not as it seems. One dusk, as the horizon shivers with distant drums, she and her grandmother return to the loom together. Their gestures are slower, deliberate, as if each movement must be weighed against the gaze of unseen eyes. They thread the heddles with earth-dyed fiber, not the bright gold and scarlet that traders crave, but colors drawn from soil and dusk, tones that whisper, that conceal and protect. They speak little, yet their labor builds an unspoken pact. Between them grows a speculative resilience. Patterns modified, legends hinted at, warnings under thread. There are moments when her grandmother, brow furrowed in concentration, lets out a sound like distant thunder, acknowledgement of Acua's careful, quiet rebellion. Every line becomes a cipher, every repeat conceals an absence, a name, a proverb, a lost homeland, rendered invisible to those who see only surface and shine. As dusk gathers the village to itself, an old Kente is unwrapped from storied cloth, a family relic, seldom shown, never sold. Her grandmother spreads it in the dusklight with reverence, tracing its labyrinth of symbols. The keystone of unity, the knife's edge of caution, the repeating echoes of a journey home. Acua examines each device under her grandmother's gaze, learning how time and threat may be encoded beneath beauty. The cloth bears silent witness, a memory safeguarded for those patient enough to read behind the splendor. Days lengthen as the rainy season grows, bringing renewal and a wary hope. Acua finds that the act of weaving is itself an argument, a visible presence in a world that would reorder value. At night, she dreams of threads running through her fingers like rivers, of patterns murmuring beneath the surface, fertile and persistent. She works in the hush before dawn and the hush after dusk, spinning small cloths for neighbors and a single, sprawling panel to be kept for herself. A tapestry of the present, neither entirely old nor entirely new. By now, the other weavers have sensed a shift. A cousin pauses at Acua's threshold, noting the muted colors, the intricate veiled motifs. There are questions, but there is also pride that somewhere, the core of their story is being guarded. Akua's work is slow, and coins do not always follow, but dignity moves through her hut like clean wind. Resistance, she learns, is sometimes the refusal to be hurried, the slow, stubborn act of creating as one must, while watchers measure only the yield, blind to meaning nested deeper in the coil of thread and hand. When at last the storms roll in, thunder drumming the thatch, the world softens into a silver hush. Rivers overflow, dank air swaddles the fields. The days stretch longer, heavy with promise and fatigue, as though the village itself aches from its burden of memory. With the rains comes renewal, but also a secret heaviness. For with each downpour, some things are refreshed, others run thin and scatter. Inside the weaver's home, Akua and her grandmother move with a care that is both ritual and necessity. The floor is swept, the gleaming spindle oiled, and the remaining stores of hand-spun thread are counted and arranged with solemn calculation. Trade ebbs and flows at the market, but the loom now stands sentinel over diminishing resources. Scarcity nudges against artistry. Colors, once chosen freely, are rationed, reserved for the cloths that matter most. Cloth for celebration grows rarer. In its place, ceremonial weavings take on new gravity, funerary patterns, wraps for rites of passage. Each commission is felt as a question. Will tradition persist, or will it be soaked away by rain and change? Amidst this uncertainty, Akua's hands no longer tremble. They move assured and deliberate, tracing the stories she alone is now entrusted to shape. Her grandmother's eyes have grown filmy with age, but her hearing and memory have sharpened in compensation. Each morning, she sits nearby, reciting proverbs, relaying the meanings tucked within each motif. The patience of the crocodile, the vigilance of the hornbill, the labyrinth that stands for wisdom hard-won. Akua listens, her heart quickening at the gravity of lineage settling onto her shoulders. At times, a hush falls, lasting not merely for an hour, but for days. The elders consult in low, firm voices. A new edict from the palace arrives. Certain patterns, those signifying royal birth or victory, are to be reserved for the king's court alone. This new boundary slices through custom like a blade, and Akua feels the constraint nestle into her fingertips. Yet resistance, she understands, is not always loud. There is slyness in continuity. She modifies her weft, a fraction narrower in one place, a deliberate asymmetry in another, small acts of preservation, subtle enough to pass unnoticed, yet bold enough to carry meaning for those who look closely. Children come to the hut after the rains, feet mudded, faces bright, seeking scraps of thread for doll clothes and games. Akua gathers the remnants for them, yellow, indigo, clay, and begins to teach what she knows. She demonstrates the simplest patterns, the most essential knots. Story by story, she passes on the core of the art, telling of the time before white men came upriver, before coins replaced gifts of salt and she. The children, wide-eyed, mimic the motions, their laughter reweaving a levity the elders have nearly forgotten. In this new generation's curiosity, Akua senses something delicately hopeful. The craft, though threatened and altered, is not finished. There are also times when the world shrinks to herself and the steady cadence of the heddles. At twilight, pressed between storm and dusk, Akua shapes a special cloth, one not to be sold nor worn, but saved. She calls this panel the river at dusk. Its colors echo the world outside. The browns of rich mud, deep twilight purples, flashes of gold in the gloom. Each line is built for endurance. For secrecy, there are flaws. But the pattern repeats regardless, always emerging anew after every interruption. She knows that one day, this tapestry may be unrolled by hands she will never see. Its meanings might outlast her, whispering across years that no longer recognize her name. As the season ages, British presence shifts and sprawls, rooting itself deeper into the kingdom's daily life. A mission opens downriver. New rulers erect administrative bungalows, and with them, foreign fabrics ride the market breeze, industrial cottons, printed silks. Some villagers, seduced by novelty or the rush of commerce, decorate their bodies with imported patterns. Akua's own friends sometimes discuss leaving. Accra, Kumasi, even across the sea to Liverpool or Freetown. She feels the tug of these possibilities, but recognizes her sphere is defined by each vital inch of thread. The stories in her keeping are both walls and pathway refuge, and that which she is called to renew. On a soft, humid night, Akua's grandmother invites her to sit. The old woman's breathing is shallow, her body frail as the wing of a moth. Yet her words are sharp, jagged with wisdom and expectation. You have seen what is lost and what will be lost, but you choose. Each time you raise your hand to weave, you create what tomorrow remembers. Not all will understand. Still, they will see. Akua burns this charge into her marrow. The loom is not only her inheritance, but a declaration, one she must affirm every day, every uncertain season hence. She threads her future into the present, knowing each decision, color, motif, omission, will shape not just cloth, but the sense of a people's endurance. In the hush of the night, the epic of the Ashanti is not thunder, but the quiet, heartbeat-steady sound of a shuttle passing back and forth. Hope threading the dusk, binding tomorrow's dream to yesterday's vow. Long before the world grew intimate with the compass rose, when knowledge passed from tongue to ear, and not hasty parchment, Carthage thrived as a city married to the sea. Hers was a harbor busy with voices, and the salt tang of ambition, crowded with purple sails and men whose skin bore the sun's testimony. The houses, with their terraces high and white as the clouds, seemed to watch over the foaming blue with a kind of haughty vigilance, as if shamed not a little by the silt and chaos crouched between them and the sea. It was here, on the dew-darkened quay at dawn, that Tylos made his way. He moved carefully, a young man unmarked by battle, but already scored by the worries of one born for waters now troubled. Before him, the Tyrian purple unfurled upon the sails in the slight wind, but the scent around him wove disquiet into pride. Tallow smoke, new-cut cedar, the ever-present threat of tar, and just beneath that, the distant, metallic tang of Roman weaponry. On this brisk morning, the city's grandeur barely veiled its unease. Now, as in a waking dream, even fishermen murmured of Roman ships that hove too close to ancestral shores, of old strengths that faltered. Tylos clutched his satchel of wax tablets as if they were talismans, and crossed over to where his mentor awaited, propped against a coil of mooring rope. Hannibal Saphax, ancient in years and knowledge, bore the ageless dignity of his calling. His hair had become sparse, yet the eyes held a seasoned brightness, reflecting only a little of the bitterness that weighed upon every Carthaginian breath these days. That morning, a hush clung to them, a silence threaded with loss, and the thrum of something about to depart forever. You look at the horizon, Tylos, but do you know what you see? Tylos hesitated. To see the sea was simple, to know her was another matter. He tried, as always, to sound more certain than he felt. Aleph, the great bear, draws us north. Orion guards the winter trade. The charts do as they have done. A sound escaped Hannibal's lips, something between a sigh and a laugh. The stars remain, boy, but men forget what dwells below. He gestured with a calloused hand to the line of water where cool blues met dull dawn. Currents, Tylos, currents older than Carthage, older than all that Rome and even Egypt could claim. Our fathers, Magan and Hanno before him, read not just heaven's lamps, but the motion of the sea itself, learned the drift, the hidden whirls, the dark passages beneath. It was these teachings, the inheritance of navigators, that now seemed to gather dust even as the city itself boasted of its mastery. The windmills churned olive pulp along the far ridges. Traders in ivory and glass chattered in at least 5 tongues. Artisans dipped cloth in stolen purple. Across the street, a circle of children sang of Dido's flame and trickster gods. All the while, the old culture ebbed, made brittle by external threat, distracted by the golden promise of distant markets. Over Hannibal's shoulder, Tylos glimpsed the slow approach of new Roman biremes, their hulls glinting in the distance. No longer did these ships come in secrecy by night. They sailed brazenly now, banners daring the olive-green shore. Word of the Romans' Corvus, the boarding bridge that turned sea battle to land skirmish, haunted the waking hours of Carthaginian elders. All the young men in the fleet knew it. Their world teetered. Yet, for one moment, the endless schools of silver fish leapt beneath the hulls with a kind of carefree grace, as if reminding those above that these roots belonged first to nature, then to man. Hannibal tapped the lacquered plank with a knuckle. See how she leans, this pier. Beneath, the current shifts each season. You will learn more touching wood with your palm than tracing lines on a map. So Tylos listened and tried to see past the old certainties. He let his hand rest on timbers slick with brine and history. What secrets, passed hand to hand and not by ink, would outlive even the greatest columns of Carthaginian pride? Here, in this delicate dawn, tradition pressed close, its touch both comfort and warning. Cloud shadows tracked across the white city walls, and all at once, the sea felt infinite, yet cloaked in mourning for what might soon be lost. The day drew on, and as Tylos followed Hannibal deeper into the warren of docks, a labyrinth of memory and craft, he heard snatches of song, argument, and prayer, each voice layered atop the next, all threading back to a central ache. Carthage was a city bracing against the tide. As the mentor spoke low of currents that changed even when the surface appeared unchanged, Tylos saw his own future braided with the city's, uncertain, storied, and perhaps destined to vanish from every chart but the ones drawn in the soul. Beneath the endless tapestry of morning commerce, the city's pulse throbbed in places where daylight surrendered to the hush of centuries. Hannibal led Tylos from the humming piers into Carthage's inner sanctum, a network of stone passages running beneath the warehouse arcades, hollow as the bones of a sleeping leviathan. This was no mere curiosity. It was a hidden world, an archive not found on any map, reserved for those whose loyalty had been shaped by saltwater and time. The air there grew cool and mineral-rich, the walls veined with ancient lime and the musk of tillers' hands. Here elders kept the oldest charts, layered like sediment under fresh papyrus, protected from moisture by tradition and secrecy. These maps bristled with lines and notations in a script even many Carthaginians could no longer decipher. Some bore burnished smudges, where fingers had traced ancestry through the familiar curve of capes and inlets. Others, fragile and brittle, listed phantom coasts long since lost to Roman conquests or changing sands. Tylos's own heart pounded as Hannibal withdrew a battered set of bronze calipers and probed the stashes along a wall's hidden alcove. There was a gravity to it, a sense of sharing not merely knowledge, but the residue of a family line. The faded ink of bonds sworn before gods vanished into the deep. Hannibal's words, murmured between breaths, took on a measured, almost sacred cadence. They taught us to look for constellations above, but out there, a day's sail from Acroluk, or beyond the gates of Melkart, it's the undercurrents and the changing color of water that mean the difference between fortune and doom. See, here, the red shoals. Only those who know the burnt umber tint under morning sun turn aside in time. Tylos bent closer, squinting at calligraphic arrows wreathed along the coastline. No pattern revealed itself at first, only after Hannibal revealed a trick, holding a bronze lamp close. Then sideways, did subtle outlines leap from the parchment. A ghostly spiral for a treacherous whirlpool, a faint ochre circle for a submerged reef, blue-gray waves inked by another hand, a generation removed. The chart was a palimpsest of wisdom, testimony to living memory pressed onto animal skin. Hannibal spoke low, as though the stones themselves might overhear. You must carry these in your marrow, not your hand. Never let Romans see them, not even fellow sailors, unless kin or oath-bound. For these are why Carthage sails farther, and for how much longer, who can say? His glance darted for a breath toward a crack in the wall, as if fearing some thin Roman shadow might have already slipped through. Yet it was not fear alone that filled the vault, but love, the fervent affection for the city's uniqueness, even as its days drew taut, threadbare, with uncertainty. Tylos found himself overwhelmed not by the sheer scope of knowledge, but by its fragility. Each map was a compact with all those vanished hands who once held a tiller against unkind wind. And each note on the current whispered that wisdom endures only as long as there are hearts both brave and subtle enough to bear it forward. Many will tell you Rome wins by iron, by straight lines and ceaseless discipline. But their ships founder where they do not know to fear the invisible. Hannibal turned, the lamplight limning every deep line, and confirming just how many seasons the old man had witnessed. To our fathers, the sea was never truly charted, just remembered. They emerged at last into a sunlit side street, Tylos blinking under the foreign glare. Above, merchant banners fluttered with Tyrian dyes. The air again thickened with coriander and the hopeful calls of porters. Yet the subterranean chill clung to Tylos's skin long after. He studied the world now with new disquiet, the surety he had known, the simple reliance on celestial navigation, on fixed ways of knowing, was receding, exposed as shallow beneath the weight of what Hannibal had revealed. The sea, it seemed, was a living cipher. As the day ripened, news filtered among the docks. A Roman patrol had intercepted 2 fishing vessels at Cape Bon. Quiet dread moved through the crowd, quick, and understated, Tylos watched the harbor from a shaded portico, his mind busied by the labyrinth of secretive knowledge, the encoded fluidity of his city's survival. The white walls of Carthage basked in afternoon brilliance, but for Tylos, every sunbeam now seemed cast upon the branch of some shadowed inlet, every sound an echo from the ancient vaults below. And so a new understanding grew inside him, a private tide, swelling with each retold lesson, each shared silence in the crypts of his calling. For the true maps of Carthage, he saw, would never be carried openly through the city's gates. They would endure, if at all, only through the devotion of those willing to be vessels themselves. Men and women who knew that tradition was not memory's prison, but its vibrant, stubborn vessel, always threatened, yet always, until the last, adrift in sunlit secrecy. Evening swept its veil over Carthage, and with the retreating glow, the first threads of a coming storm tangled in the horizon. For days, the uneasy peace between the familiar fleet and the distant Roman silhouettes had held, the city's life pulsing between anticipation and denial. But now, as thunderheads bruised the setting sun and the sea grew restive, a rumor surged through the streets, fast as panic, silent as a dagger's whisper. Roman warships, it was murmured, had anchored in hostile formation beyond the great island reefs, and their oars stilled only for the onslaught of a gale. Tylos stood atop the ramparts, gaze fastened upon the places where the sky fractured over black water. Below, the city's lights flared in shuttered windows. Above, clouds gathered mass and purpose, rolling like armies upon some voiceless command. The port seemed transformed, bigger somehow in its silence, more vulnerable against the oncoming dark. Runners darted along the dockside, bearing orders, summons, and in some cases, final farewells. The sea's rhythm quickened, a language more urgent than any tongue, the breathing of a world about to be tested. Hannibal Saphax appeared in the half-light, his movements now marked by the measured resolve of a man who had lived through more storms than most men could count. Stripped of all ceremony, the mentor's instructions were gruff, direct. Tonight the city will be blind except by flashes. You and I on the lead galley. The council wants those currents, Tylos, needs them, now that every Roman mast marks the difference between escape and ending. There was little left to say, and so the two plunged into the frantic order of preparation. Oar masters barked to their crews, helmsmen prayed under their breath. Somewhere a child wailed, answered by a mother's hush and the sheeted roar of surf against stone. Light from torches cast wild shadows, flickering across stored amphorae and the bright copper nails sealed in the hulls. Orders were exchanged in a clipped, code-laden tongue, the vernacular of survivors. When at last they rode into open water, the sky cracked open, lightning illuminating the Roman formation. A steel-edged chain upon the horizon, the enemy ships rode low and ready. To Tylos's eye, they seemed less like vessels than blunt assertions of power. Rain lashed the decks, blurring friend from foe, drowning even the shouting of commanders. In those moments, Tylos felt every lesson of the hidden charts come fierce and alive. The taste of brine as it thickened, the subtle press of current against the hull, the way the ship's frame trembled at the edge of each turning tide. The galley swept along a passage only Hannibal and his kind had ever charted, a shadowed corridor between shoals, known by the way the winds changed pitch as they funneled through hidden rocks. Roman triremes, encumbered by their heavy boarding bridges, failed to read the water's warnings. Two vessels veered astray and struck submerged outcrops, splintering in the gale. The cries of their crews became companion notes in the storm song, reminders that nature kept her own impartial tally. All through the tempest, Tylos worked the signals, lantern veiled, then bright, guiding allied ships through invisible narrows. Hannibal called out the turns not by chart, but by feel. The groan of planks beneath him, the roll of thunder echoing against low cliffs, the taste of iron in the wind. This was not navigation as the Romans understood it. It was an old, almost mystical dialogue with sea and memory. In the briefest lull, Tylos glimpsed the elder laying his hand on the ship's bow, eyes closed, mouth moving in a prayer too low for mortal ears. Was it a plea to Baal-Hamon, or thanks to forgotten kin whose spirits might yet linger in the kelp and fathomless cold? By midnight, Carthage's fleet had slipped the Roman cordon, some battered, some scarred, but intact. On the stern, the city's watchfires painted ripples of gold across black water, and for a moment, the fleet's survival seemed nearly miraculous, a fleeting rebuke to the Empire's rigid arithmetic. Yet in the morning, as the battered crews limped home, the price was as clear as the blue returned to the Mediterranean. Debris washed onto the outer beaches. Among the flotsam, the ink-black wax seals of broken charts, the wood of lost prows, a single Roman helmet split cleanly down the crest. The storm had passed, but the city's fate felt more tightly coiled than before. Every escape owed to deep memory, to the hush of secret lessons handed down in trust. Yet each victory bought, Tylos now understood, only a little more time, a thin reprieve before the storm returned, whether upon the wind or the tramping boots of men who sailed not for discovery, but for dominion. When the shattered clouds finally broke and early sunlight glazed the waves with a fragile sheen, Carthage was a city rethreading itself with the threads of aftermath. The sea, just hours ago alive with violence, now breathed out a rhythmic, tentative peace, as if unsure whether to trust its own tranquility. Along the battered docks, survivors gathered, silent, slow-moving figures hunched over injuries both visible and invisible. Nets were mended without chatter, and amphorae bore not only oil and olives, but now the weight of names unspoken, friends not returned. Tylos moved among the fleet's survivors, hands roughened, face wind-bruised, but his gaze more inward than ever before. The night's ordeal had carried him deeper than any charted inlet or learning. He felt, in ways wordless and private, the changing lineage of his calling. Before, navigation had been an act of obedience, an application of inherited signs. Now, it was the hushed deliberation of those who had seen the sea's ferocity and grasped what might truly be lost when memory faded from living guides. In a neighbor's courtyard, beneath fig trees whose leaves shimmered with stormwash, elders gathered to reckon the damage and re-anchor the city's future. Hannibal, his presence now frailer but willed upright by habit, presided in the shadow-streaked garden as if it were a chamber more solemn than any marble hall. "We cannot match Rome's iron by iron," he granted, gesturing to broken spears stacked near a cypress. "We are made, instead, by what we remember and what we dare not write down." An acolyte unfurled a drying chart, its corners warped, its ink a fading testament, a map but also a question. What endures when the hands to interpret it grow few? Hannibal's voice, though thin, gathered force as he addressed this gathering, a council not just of navigators, but of Carthage itself. Every warning inked here, every safe haven shadowed, was earned not in grand battles, but in lives spent listening, in feet pressing the city's stones, in fingers reading the water's mood. If Carthage is to last, it will not be in the breadth of our walls, but in the depth of our remembering. Tylos felt the words settle into him, fusing with what reverence survived the storm's scouring. He looked at those assembled, the youngest restless, eyes not yet dimmed by loss, the oldest, hands trembling but not relinquished. There was mourning here, not loud, but a quiet contraction around each uttered name, and with it, a resolve. If legacy meant more than the keeping of relics, then it was active, a practice, an invisible infrastructure carried onward by the living. After the council, Tylos sought his own solace by the harbor's edge, where the ship's shadows painted the pier with fractured geometry. He pressed a hand to the piling, feeling again for the subtle deviations that marked the season's changes. The voices of fishermen reached him in drifting bits of conversation, tiny, granular observations about tides and swells that, accumulated over decades, were worth far more than any single victory. If the empire could never understand this, that true mastery grows not by conquest, but by the slow, quiet hoarding of meaning, then Carthage might yet endure beyond the tally of its walls. He found Hannibal seated beside a beached skiff, gaze turned seaward as though already embarking. There was no ritual now, only the familiarity of two men who had spoken together at the edge of ruin. "The sea takes what it will," Hannibal said, not in bitterness, but as if reciting a blessing. "But we choose what returns." In that hour, the horizon was both boundary and invitation, a place behind which storms and invaders might wait, but also the only direction left for hope. Ships had already begun to move out, some seeking new fishing grounds, others scouting the Roman watchpoints. Tylos traced on the sand with a fragment of driftwood the imaginary loops and crossings of journeys not yet made. In the curve of each line, he glimpsed the shape of Carthage that would not be reduced, that lived wherever someone recalled how to slip unseen between dangers. As dusk resumed its soft encroachment, a child ran past, scattering gulls. The old patterns of city life, bargaining, laughter, the clang of bronze, resumed their gentler cadence. The future's uncertainty was not lessened, but newly woven with a stubborn dignity. Tylos understood now what could never be taken by siege or treaty. The intricate weave of experience, the gift of seeing the world as both map and mystery. That night, by the gleam of oil lamps, he took to copying anew the secret signs from memory, outlining a chart not for official sanction, but as a promise the kind one makes to the dead and to those not yet born, that the sea's wisdom would not perish so long as anyone cared enough to remember. With each careful stroke, the city stood silent behind him, its fate unanswered, its legacy quietly lengthening across the water. In the waning blush of dawn, when the sky above Smaragd opened bleary eyes to the first, hesitant tendrils of light, Kemet would walk the length of the sleeping city's southern quarter. He became the day's earliest breath, silent save for the soft scuff of his sandals on windswept dust. The old Pottery lane lay like a secret ribbon strung tight between sun-baked mud-brick walls and the sleeping memory of the kingdom. Its charred kilns, its shuttered doorways, each a testament to hands and centuries now diminished. Here, in the kingdom of Kush's dying years, only one kiln still drew breath. Its smoke curled with a wavering stubbornness, thin and fragrant, mingling with whispers of acacia and Nile silt. This kiln was tended by Anhotep, the master Kemet so dutifully served, and Kemet himself, a youth of 12 winters whose patience was rivaled only by the inexhaustible Nile. The other potters had faded away, claimed by age, disease, or the slow, relentless ebb of prosperity from the city's heart. Only laughter, distant and childless, remembered their names. Kemet's hands had already learned the discipline of earth and water. His fingers possessed the tactile memory of centuries, the secret, weightless communication with malformed lumps of ochre clay that would, beneath careful caress, reveal the perfect curve of a water jug or the fine-lipped meditations of a wine goblet. Each pot was a song in his mind. He knew the soft, leathery resistance beneath his palm, the dying tremor of a completed vessel as it parted from the wheel. He spoke with clay the way a priest might whisper to old gods, with awe, with humility, and hope that something, anything, of his lineage might persist. The city thrummed with mourning as the quarter awoke, voices rising and folding upon one another in languages as old as its pyramids. Distant, children of shepherds ran, shouting, past the edge of the smithies, their play echoing off walls that had witnessed queens crowned and foreign generals repelled. Kemet greeted the dawn with the soft percussion of his tools, reverently laying each on the battered cedar shelf beside his wheel. The rhythm of the day began not with anxiety, but with the ritual purity of habit, as it always had, since before Rome's shadow stretched toward their gates. But hush beneath the wheel's droning song, and anxiety found its place. The old, hunched women at the well spoke of Roman patrols glimpsed beyond the far dunes. Caravans arriving from the north had grown more nervous, their camels loaded thin and their tails sharpened by fear. They encircle us, these men of bronze, whispered the spice seller to his wife, though in Kemet's memory the Romans had always been a rumor, a presence more persistent in story than in flesh. Yet now, even Anhotep's stoop seemed deeper. Mare's walls had stood for centuries, but the city's soul, once pulsing with the optimism of trade and festivals, now flickered like the last embers of a dying kiln. Inside their cramped workshop, Anhotep moved among the cooling shelves, peering through cataract-dulled eyes at each piece Kemet had shaped the day before. His approval was sparse, a simple nod, or a tightening at the corners of his mouth, as if all praise now exacted too heavy a price. Behind him, shelves held treasures undreamed by outsiders. Blue-glazed incense chalices lined with lotus designs, spindle-necked vases adorned with stylized ibises, small lamps thick with the finger-printed memories of 4 generations, each separated from oblivion by only the kiln's next fire. This morning, Kemet shaped a bowl. The old ways dictated silence. No idle talk, no humming, only the measured dance of hand and eye. Listening to the gentle turn of the wheel, Kemet dreamt of the Nile's great sweep, of harvest-time banquets where his wares might one day rest, if such banquets came again. He pressed his thumb along the rim, reading patterns of tension in the clay, as if searching for omens. The vessel responded, yielding to his intent, but deep beneath, he felt the ache of everything that threatened to vanish. Abruptly, Anhotep halted beside him. "You work with too much longing, boy," the master murmured, voice soft yet sharpened by experience. Clay remembers. It echoes what we dare not say. His hand, broad and calloused, closed gently over Kemet's wrist in a rare gesture of care. Anhotep's gaze lingered at the doorway, beyond which, unbeknownst to them, centuries weighed upon the future. Outside, far in the market square, a trumpet cried. The arrival, perhaps, of another Roman envoy or news from the river gates. Life tightened in the chest of every citizen. Old rhythms shuddered. But within the time-stilled air of the Pottery quarter, the wheel spun on. Kemet breathed, felt the earth, and shaped his bowl, an act of defiance, of memory, of hope that somehow his own hands might write against erasure. So he worked, as the last apprentice in a dying craft, listening to the kiln's shallow breath and the deep, unyielding silence stretching toward tomorrow. As the day pressed forward and sunlight fractured into plains of gold and copper over the city's tiled rooftops, Kemet found himself immersed in the arcana of the kiln, in the outer yard of the workshop, where palm fronds cast patient, dappled shadows across trodden earth. The air vibrated with the scent of smoldering dung and unshed rain. The kiln, ancient, dark-shouldered, and reassuringly flawed, waited with the wary temper of a living creature. To fire clay was never simple alchemy. It was negotiation. And the kiln, keeper of secrets, yielded its favor only for those who observed its unspoken codes. Anhotep's instruction, seasoned by the burdens of time, unfolded with enigmatic precision. See the way the smoke curls, never straight, never hurried, he would whisper, scattering a handful of reeds into the mouth of the firebox. The old master's body moved within the rising haze, his sleeves blackened by years of tending errant flames. Kemet followed, obedient and anxious, learning to gauge the shifting mood of embers, the elusive language of heat and breath. The fire is a judge, Kemet. Too hot, and the pot cracks, too cold, and you bake only memory. Within the walls, the city wrestled with its own tempests. Soldiers stationed at the northern gate now wore unfamiliar crests, and whispers of treaties cloaked the market's daily trade in something brittle. Kemet, though often lost in the intricacies of his craft, sensed these countercurrents. The world outside grew restless while here, around the glowing heart of the kiln, time condensed to the pulse of waiting. He watched Anhotep's hands twist a slip of clay, remembered the way his mother once did while telling fables of origin and rain, and tried to fold both tradition and longing into the shape of each vessel. There were rituals here, silent but immutable. Before firing, Kemet would dust the greenware with ochre as Anhotep hummed prayers only half remembered. The two arranged the pieces with small reverence, believing each placement altered the vessel's fate. He learned to judge the kiln's readiness by the quality of the smoke, whether it stung the eyes with impatience or rippled gently like the surface of midday water. Patience, Anhotep insisted, was the trait that separated mere artisans from those who could infuse clay with memory itself. One dusk, as rain gathered on the horizon and the wind danced with phantom voices, Anhotep lit the evening's firing. The flames recoiled, then settled, casting a flickering illumination onto both their faces. The old master's gaze was haunted by secrets not yet given over to night. "This fire will outlast us, as the river does," he said, voice blurred by fatigue. "But only if someone remembers and returns." Kemet crouched beside the heat, eyes watering, hands extended over the glow. Through the wavering haze, he peered into the kiln's hollow mouth and saw, not mere vessels, but tokens of a kingdom's dwindling pulse, a memory solidifying in red, ochre, and black. Around them, the city's sounds faded, distant music of a wedding, a lone dog's bark, the rumble of carts bearing the last of the iron ore to waiting boats. Above, the stars began to press down, ancient and watchful, each a tiny sentinel over a land sliding into uncertainty. Sometimes Anhotep spoke as if the past itself might be coaxed from clay. My father taught me here as his father before him. We have all been ash and wind, but every vessel that survives, every mark of thumb and tool, holds the shape of our days. He reached into the embers and withdrew a pot, its surface still warm and iridescent in the gathering gloom. Kemet noticed the thumbprint embedded beneath the glaze, a signature more enduring than the faintest royal decree. As night deepened, Kemet felt the gravity of inheritance. He was not merely learning a trade, he was gathering the scattered syllables of a language no longer spoken in the streets, piecing together the liturgy of touch, patience, and the hunger for beauty in sorrowful times. The fire, at last tamed and sighing, offered both warmth and melancholy reassurance. In its glow, every imperfection was illuminated, each small fracture a song of survival, not defeat. Mara, beyond the yard, slept in uneasy shadows. Yet for Kemet, beneath the sentinel gaze of stars and the cooling breath of the kiln, the act of making was a promise, not only to remember, but to endure even as the secrets of the fire neared their final telling. The air in Mara grew taut with anticipation, a city strung between the brittle hush before calamity and the clamor of foreign boots along its perimeter. As the sun arched toward its zenith, the Pottery lane was rattled by an unfamiliar cadence, armored sandals grinding dust, leather straps creaking against metal, and the clipped, guttural language of Rome. Their arrival was more than a curiosity. It rippled through the city's trembling heart, unsettling even those who clung to their daily rituals like talismans against fate. A cohort of Roman envoys, faces sun-scorched, armor dull from travel, strode into the Pottery quarter, trailing behind them the scent of foreign oils and the pragmatic, unyielding aura of conquest. Their leader, a sharp-eyed centurion named Lucius Petronius, paused at the entrance to Anhotep's humble workshop, his gaze appraising the kiln and shelves, as if deciphering clues to a riddle. Villagers instinctively drifted away from the lane, the hush of their withdrawal more damning than any overt hostility. Kemet, unaccustomed to such scrutiny, stood behind his wheel as Anhotep stepped forward, measured and dignified despite the quiver in his hands. There was a moment's tension, the meeting point of empire and obscurity, before the centurion spoke. His words, heavily accented but precise, announced the emperor's new decree. All iron forges, granaries, and crafts of significance would be inspected and taxed. Roman control, he declared, brought order and protection, but only in exchange for obedience and tribute. Anhotep bowed his head with a restraint that was neither servility nor defiance. The centurion motioned, and two soldiers peeled away to prowl the shelves. They picked up vessels and set them down, tilting a blue-banded jar to catch the light, tracing a fingernail along a carved ibis, as though testing the thickness of history itself. The silence of their handling pressed on Kemet, louder than any threat. The very act of touch, performed without reverence, violated something sacred and irreplaceable. Petronius's gaze swept from the crackled glaze to the faces of those in the room. "We have heard," he said, "that this city once rivaled our southern provinces, that its hands shaped trade and tribute for pharaoh and queen alike. Where now is that skill? Where are your workers?" His question lingered in the warm gloom, an accusation wrapped in bureaucratic curiosity. Kemet, sensing Anhotep's struggle, held his tongue, watching as the master chose his words with care. "We are few now," Anhotep replied, steady yet flecked with bitterness. "Most craftsmen are gone, lost to war, hunger, or Roman markets. Ours is the last kiln to serve this city, to give shape to its memory." One of the soldiers, perhaps bored or merely curious, knocked over a half-formed jug, its brittle stem snapping in two. Kemet winced but did not move, keeping his eyes lowered as the master, with silent grace, lifted and cradled the ruin in his palms. It was not just clay that splintered, but days of labor and a hope for permanence. Petronius observed, but offered neither apology nor scorn. To him, the loss was negligible, a trifle to be tallied alongside censuses and tributes. "There will be levies on all crafts," the centurion continued, "and new records kept. Pottery may not be as valued as iron, but every vessel plays its part. Rome is thorough. You will submit items for inventory and pay what is owed by week's end." His words struck the workshop like an intrusion of winter into a green season. Then, with the rehearsed indifference of command, Petronius and his men drifted out into the market, their departure stirring dust, but not the unease they had sown. As the echo of sandals faded and villagers crept back from hiding, Anhotep set down the broken jug beside the kiln. In the pantomime of repair, his hands trembled with exhaustion, whether from age, anger, or something deeper. Kemet could not say. They worked in silence until the midday shadow shrank and order returned. Yet the mood of inevitability curled round them like the acrid remains of a smothered fire. To be counted, Anhotep finally broke the hush, is to be weighed, measured, and eventually spent. Rome makes a record of everything, but it does not see. He took Kemet's shoulder in a gesture both parental and protective, urging him back to the wheel. Let them tax clay and labor. Let them measure beauty with ledgers. The soul will not be tabulated. Remember that, boy. Still, Kemet's chest tightened with worry. The Romans saw only artifacts for counting and export, not conduits for the city's soul. That day, he shaped his pots with a new gravity. The wheel under his hands, a silent protest, recording each revolution, not just in clay, but in the memory of all that risked vanishing under foreign weight. Outside, the marketplace roused itself to sullen wariness. Ironmongers murmured of hiding tools, weavers of sacrificing the finer threads to save the coarse, while mothers sighed at the rising price of bread. Yet within the cloistered air of the last pottery workshop, Kemet knelt at the wheel, the Roman decree a cold pressure at his back. He pressed forward out of necessity and duty, each vessel emerging not to please new masters, but to cradle the breath of vanished time, unbroken by ledger or sword. Thus, beneath the indifferent gaze of empire, the battle for memory continued, shapeless, slow, and infinitely patient, echoing in every uncounted fingerprint burned into the city's last clay. The days that followed wore a brittle glaze of quiet, as if the city itself braced for fracture under the weight of the new edict. Sunlight sifted weakly through dust and haze, softening the edges of buildings once proud, now pitted and faded along corners and lintels. the lanes filled with covert motion, the hurried trundle of carts at dawn, the muted exchanges of hands slipping grain and lamp oil beneath wool cloaks, and the ever-present sentinels of Rome, watching from marketplaces that had once grown fat on iron and cattle. Inside the pottery workshop, Kemet and Anhotep worked with a feverish steadiness that was not calm, but a plea against erasure. The rhythm of shaping, trimming, and handling was altered now by the necessity of haste. Each bowl, each amphora, became a small act of endurance pushed toward completion before the next visitation from the city's new overseers. Anhotep's gaze was often fixed on some distance within, responding to queries only after long pauses, as though plucking his answers from the farthest boundary of memory. Yet the kiln itself became their anchor. Its mouth, scorched from years of feeding, yawned with an almost sentient gravity, pulling from them not only the raw clay of Kush, but something more essential: defiance and remembrance, pity and persistent voiceless hope. In the late hours, Kemet tended to it with a devotion that bordered upon the absolute. Gathering branches and dung, he knelt before the fire as he might at a shrine, coaxing flame from the narrowest tongue of ember. The old master's hand, trembling but sure as it guided the stoking, was a cipher of lessons too complex for speech. As the first batch emerged, Kemet studied them in the wavering lamplight. These were not showpieces for distant markets. Their forms were robust, their decoration sparse, intended for hands, not eyes. Handles bore subtle thumb rests, rims softened by a single sweep of cloth, bodies sturdy and unadorned save for the faintest scoring along their girth. A code, perhaps, that only hearts like theirs could read. They were, Kemet understood, vessels marked not for fame but for fidelity. To the river, to the city, to all that stood in danger of slipping soundlessly away. On the third night, as the moon pressed thin, cold light through a shroud of clouds, a crack cleaved the silence. The ancient kiln, overburdened, exhausted, and beset by hurried firing, gave a groan not unlike a wounded animal. Kemet raced to the hearth, hands instinctively reaching for the spade. As a seam worked its way along the bricks, splitting the facade from base almost to crown, the fire sputtered, then steadied, but the damage was unmistakable. Anhotep was at his side in an instant, face ashen beneath smudges of ash, eyes holding a chaos rarely revealed. Without a word exchanged, they worked to patch what they could, sliding clay and scraps of pounded straw into fissures, sealing gaps with wetted earth. The master's movements were halting, sometimes slipping into moments of reverie. Brows knotted not only with concern for the structure, but in memory of all that had come before. In this dimly lit struggle, the kiln's near ruin became a crucible for their hopes and fears. Would this be the final night the fire ever burned for Mara's living tradition? When at last the flames steadied, Kemet and Anhotep pressed their backs to the warm bricks, sharing a quiet forged from mutual exhaustion. The heat radiating from the kiln was softer than before, uneven, but stubborn. Outside, the city exhaled an uneasy sleep. Within the workshop, the silence thickened to a quality akin to prayer. Kemet's thoughts tumbled between anxiety and awe. He understood, perhaps truly for the first time, that fragility and endurance were twin faces of the same story. Anhotep broke the hush only once before dawn, voice rough as unshaped earth. Every craft has its last day, but so long as fire breathes here, even in pain and imperfection, the world remembers. He ran his palm along the fault line, smearing soot into the creases, pressing history back into flesh and mortar alike. So the days gathered behind them, each marked by new cracks in wall and spirit. Their output slow, yet fiercely purposeful, Kemet shaped vessels with care that was no longer innocence, but reverence brushed with fear. Patterns grew more spare, lines dictated not by flourish but by need. As the city waited for the Romans, for news, for omens, the kiln, scarred and defiant, held out a stubborn promise. In the glow of its final embers, heritage was no longer just received, but desperately, quietly willed into the future. The dawn after the kiln's wounding was awash in a peculiar clarity. Pale mists rolled from the Nile's distant ribbon, silvering the abandoned fields and settling among the city's forgotten terraces. Kemet, sleepless, yet driven by a current stronger than weariness, gathered at the workshop gate before even the first market cries. His feet traced the familiar course of earth hardened by centuries, carrying with them a quiet duty that felt both ancestral and new. Mare's pulse was faint, but enduring. Only a handful of traders moved across the square, casting wary looks in the direction of the Roman census tent, now anchored among the date palms. The world outside had grown smaller and narrower, but within the boundaries of the workshop, a largeness persisted. The enormity of inheritance, the silent charge of carrying a whole city's identity in the curve of a bowl, or the thickness of a jug's neck. Each of Kemet's movements that morning was deliberate, a ritual of contact with clay that was also a conversation with everything he risked losing. Anhotep, moving more slowly than before, entered beside him. The kiln, injured but not undone, exhaled its warmth in a ragged hush. Together, they sifted through the wares cooled overnight. The rough-bellied jars, the squat oil lamps, the simple goblets that bore the faintest echo of river reeds along their sides. They sorted, wrapped, and regarded every piece as an act of memory, as if searching the surface for the faces and voices of a vanished multitude. For the first time, Kemet sensed his own hands becoming old within the shaping, an extension not simply of youthful diligence, but of a lineage stoked by grief and stubbornness alike. As the morning advanced, news drifted in faint currents. A neighbor, face shadowed by suspicion, confided that the Romans were drafting lists for a final levy, an accounting that would tip many beyond the edge, leaving behind only those too forgotten to matter. In the pause between tasks, Anhotep brushed dust from the workshop threshold and spoke quietly. This city will not survive as Rome demands. All that's left is not tribute, but what we choose to send forward. Guided by this private conviction, the master gathered Kemet and between them selected several vessels, each humble, durable, plain. Into these, Anhotep pressed a fragment of inscribed clay. A ciphered message, barely legible, but containing the names of masters and apprentices, the lineage of the wheel, the invocations to gods, now barely spoken. The act was furtive, sorrowful, yet strangely liberating, as if they were planting the DNA of their craft where it might take root far beyond reach of conquest. Kemet's heart raced with each vessel readied, aware that these were not only tools for bread and water, but vessels of sorrow and hope cast deep into the unseeable future. In the late afternoon, Kemet crossed the city to the old burial grounds, where ruined stele crouched beside acacia. There, in a shallow hollow, he and Anhotep buried the selected pots beneath shards of older, broken ones, a mingling of eras in mute, earthen fellowship. No words were spoken, for words, like cities themselves, can falter at such thresholds. Only the scrape of hands against earth and the measured tamping of soil declared the final covenant. As sun bled low behind the dunes, the two potters returned. Their kiln offered a faint, stubborn glow, casting elongated shadows along the workshop wall. Anhodeb, at last, rested in a way Kemet had not seen before, shoulders softening under the relinquishment of duty. The master's voice, when it came, was a nearly silent benediction. Let them say we vanished in peace. Clay lasts longer than empire. That night, Kemet remained long after his master drifted to sleep. He relit the fire one final time, tending it not for production or delivery, but ritual, an act of remembrance and gratitude. He passed each hand through the warmth, cataloging the touch and scent, the sound of fragile bricks settling as flame made peace with ash. In the silence, he felt the presence of the old city, the cattle drives of youth, laughter spun high and clean from festival rooftops, the scent of rain on first harvest bread. It was not grief alone that warmed him. It was the charged stillness of having shifted history, even imperceptibly, by honoring it not with lament, but with work and witness. By morning, the city would waken to new decrees, harsher still, and a counting of mouths and vessels before the close of day. But within these last hours, the oldest fire in Mera burned for itself, a final heartbeat echoing into the still, waiting dusk. In clay, in memory, in the vow that endures unseen, Kemet became not merely the last apprentice, but the silent seed of everything that would not be erased.